Right. Cool. So live, we're recording. Have I told you guys lately how much I appreciate the chance to support you in what you're doing? It's really a huge privilege for me. And I'm grateful for everything that you guys bring that makes this really awesome. So thanks. Topics for office hours today. There was a plea for AJAX, and might be good to identify a little more specifically what that is. James had a question about deciding when it's better to run fetch against an API versus submitting a form. And then this question about SQL injection, which came from Brandon and to a certain extent, Miles. Anything else?
On the MVC, like almost specific to this project of why pulling, basically exporting modules from one file and then having a file that basically it's like an intermediary whose sole use is also to take those that exported object and then re-export it again.
Mm-hmm. Okay. MVC. Why all the boilerplate code?
There we go. That'll work.
Okay. Anything else? Cool. As always, let me know if this is too small or hard to see. So the AJAX question, who was it that was wondering about that? Stephanie? What's the particular question that you have?
I guess just like how to use it. Yeah. I mean, at AJAX and Fetch, like I've used Fetch before, but I've not used AJAX.
Okay.
And so it's kind of just like a walkthrough of AJAX.
And I'm going to add different available libraries.
Awesome.
That would be cool.
Uh-huh. Cool. So, yeah, so when we say AJAX, we are sometimes referring to one of two things, or maybe referring to even more than that. AJAX as an idea is this idea that web pages, prior to like 2005, 2006, basically any web page that you would find would be something that was put together on the server and served to you. And it might have interactive elements like where you click a button and this thing changes because, JavaScript. But basically the content you got was the content you got. And then sometime around 2005, somebody said, wait a minute, what if we could make requests from our page that's already loaded and get data from somewhere else and put it into our page, or use it to update what we have or to change what we have. And that gave rise to like this kind of amazing thing that we have now, which is the idea of like a web application where you load a page and it's not so much a page, it's an app in and of itself, and that you can do multiple things with it. It can serve multiple kinds of data, all of that. You guys know why it's called AJAX? Uh-huh. Yeah. Yep. Asynchronous JavaScript and XML. I remember being in college and like having this feeling like XML was like the big thing. Didn't really happen. I mean, it was a thing for a while. But yeah, so the idea was asynchronous JavaScript and XML. Originally, XML was one of the tools or one of the formats used to send the data back and forth. today we use JSON almost exclusively. Almost every API that you're going to encounter is going to use JSON. So it should really be called AJAX, but we just still call it AJAX kind of for historical reasons. Yeah, sounds better. So that's AJAX, the concept. And it's important to kind of wrap your mind around that. That's one of the things that I'd want out of this phase for you to be really solid on, is the how it works to fetch data from a web page, namely client-side fetching. Because we do stuff on the server side, we do stuff with databases, but on the client side, we can also do, we can make these queries to the database. And so just having that clear in your mind how that works is important.
And then when you do that, it still goes through the server, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like it goes from client to server to database,
Mm-hmm.
and still gets handled by middleware and all of that.
Yeah. So just to close this thought, and then I want to address that. So we talk about AJAX, and a lot of times we're talking about that, namely the idea. But then there's also like AJAX libraries, and so one in particular is jQuery has a .ajax command, and so sometimes I've heard particular learners saying, referring to that as AJAX. I would call that. I would be more inclined to call that jQuery, or like jQuery's AJAX or something like that, just for clarity. But yeah, I mean, what you're saying, Stephanie, this is really the eraser anywhere. I have a Kleenex. We got into recursion yesterday, me and Danny. Super fun. But yeah, if you imagine there's a server, and there's back here maybe a database, and they talk to each other back and forth through an API that you create. Namely, you make some database functions. Those database functions are made available to the rest of your app. The server doesn't interface with the database, it interfaces with your functions. So that's an abstraction. Yeah, you could basically think of an abstraction as is it separate in a diagram like this? Or could it be separate? So then we've got the server, but then we've also got over here the client. And they talk to each other back and forth. But there's a kind of couple ways this can go. So one of the things that the server can do is it can itself access the database, get all the information it needs, and give you a server rendered page. And so when we do that, that's like EJS pug. It's the res.render. And so you can have server rendered pages. But you can also have this client get a page of an app like we're talking about, and then it can make its own queries to your server to some endpoints that you create. And so it's different than this. So this is serving the web page, and these would be endpoints that you're accessing to access your data. And then it will give you a response back. And so while this is all about serving HTML, JavaScript, CSS, this is all about serving resources. And in particular, it could be like, what is it from the code immutability? It's like /albums. And so you could have /albums, you could have /albums/1 for the album ID 1. That's what we're doing here. And this is where you would be making a RESTful API. So is that clear?
What's an endpoint?
Okay. Yeah. What's fuzzy?
I guess visualizing how it's going.
Visualizing how it's.
Grabbing the resources.
Okay.
Like how that's different, I guess. I mean, how is it getting the rendered pages not also getting resources, I guess?
Say that question again.
Because when I think of like when we talk to the routes to get the rendered pages, is not getting the resource as well?
So yeah, so in your server, you would have some. So there's the static. What's it called? In your Express server, where you set up a static resource server. That's where you're serving like an HTML page. Could be JavaScript. That would be. I don't want to confuse things too much, but that would be like if you were having like a front-end React interface. What we do a lot here is the server-side rendering. So that's, again, res.render, and then you're naming some template that you've got. And that's sending, it's in the logic of that route, you are gathering the information that you need and then sending a page, template filled in with that information. So that what arrives over here is a more or less static page that has all the information that you want. And so the difference is you can do that where you get all the information here and then send over the relatively static page. Or you can send over a page that is equipped, it may not have any data in it at all, but it's equipped to make an AJAX call that goes back to your server, and instead of kind of this template rendering part, these routes, you're actually going to an API that you create where you're specifically making resources available to front-end AJAX query like this. And one of the reasons this might be a little foreign is because we haven't actually done a lot of this in phase 3, practice phase. And I'm wanting us to do more because it's an important piece to understand. Most of the time what you're doing in these goals is this, the server-side rendering of some data. But just know that what we're talking about with AJAX is you give the client a page that itself can make queries back to the database or back to your server really for the information that it needs. Is that a little clear?
Yes.
Yeah. And so who did the CRUD mutably app project? Okay, so basically everybody. So when you're doing that, what we've done is we've actually given you this whole thing. We've given you, there's a database and a server, and it's all set up. You don't actually even see the code for this because it's running on Heroku. All you do is write a client, a page that loads in your browser, but that has some code in it to make these AJAX queries. And so, you're querying some resource like /album/1, but you're not actually having to write those routes. So as you zoom out and see how this all fits together, just know that when you did that, you had these routes pre-provided. But if you were making a full stack app kind of from start to finish, you would be writing some routes here too.
And I feel like in CRUD mutably, you did have to write a fetch call.
Right.
Yeah.
You did have to write the fetch call, but you didn't have to define the routes on the server to say, go to the database and fetch the albums or the books or whatever it was. Pretty clear? So, and then you were saying about, I said I wanted to come back to it.
What's an endpoint?
That was the question I had. Yeah, what is an endpoint? You were mentioning that when you do the fetch of the AJAX call, it goes to the server and it finds the endpoint. And I was just asking, what is that? Like?
Yeah, so I use the terminology endpoint and resource kind of similarly. Endpoint just meaning like a point at which you can get data from the server.
Okay.
So the kind of typical terminology here is resources. You're making these resources like albums, users, repositories, whatever you're serving up, you call resources. But you can also, like the path that you go to, you can call that an endpoint, and that's the thing that you're querying.
Okay.
So actually, sorry. I was just going to say, like, the kind of light bulb that went off this for me is that, like, an endpoint when you're making your own API, which I didn't quite understand, is it's literally your route. So if you are want to delete something, you set up a delete route on that page, and then if you want to do it asynchronously, you make a fetch call to your own route. So you're basically writing both pieces of it.
So that you can write without having the whole page have to run, and you can just delete that.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean,
Isn't that the whole goal too, of just using fetch and AJAX, is so that your page doesn't have to reload every time you make a change on
exactly.
it, and that it can look more nicer.
Yeah, exactly.
And that while I'm deleting all my friends on Facebook, I can still look at posts.
Yeah, yeah. The posts are actually refreshing automatically, probably.
Yeah.
Let me see. I just want to pull up what an API looks like.
Hours. I haven't talked to you in years.
Goodbye, friend. I haven't talked to you in years. Oh.
Or I've never had a conversation with you in real life. Bye.
Yep. There's I've done a few fundraisers over the years. One when I was launching a business, I was fundraising from some friends, and one of the things that was really kind of sweet and humbling to me was the number of people on Facebook who I had like a very kind of minimal relationship to. It's like we met once, or maybe they just, they're the friend of somebody that, whatever, but who in that moment chose to donate to the fundraiser. And so I always think about that when I'm like thinking about, these Facebook friends that are kind of acquaintances. Mm-hmm. It's like how sweet it is when they're like, all right, I'm going to show up and support you. Mm-hmm. It's like, wow, or they leave like nice comments on, some posts. It's like, well, you can do whatever you want. So what I want to pull up here is just when I was leading P2, when there was a P2, we made a RESTful API that served up, what was it? So I'm going to pull out the routes. So yeah, so it's serving contacts. And we've got these database utilities, these database functions that get the contacts. But this is what a route looks like. So this would be this part, kind of green part of the server, is a read route. So a GET request to /contacts sends back a JSON, some JSON that contains the list of contacts. A GET request to contacts / and then a particular ID sends back that particular contact. A put request creates a contact. And actually, you can use put or you can use post. Some people have very strong feelings about this. But you can make this put request to /contacts. Again, it's the same thing as the other contacts, same endpoint or path, but a different method. And when you do that, then we call this create contact. You add the person to the database, and you might send back some information that's like, hey, here's the person that was created. You can update And here we're doing, updating a particular contact. So we get the information from a post body, and then we actually go through and update that contact. So this is what's on that Heroku server when you're doing the CRUD Mutably project. Whether it was like Pokemon books and albums or something like that, were your choices.
Yeah.
And so what it means is that there's some JavaScript code, an Express server that's running on Heroku that is serving up stuff in this format, which is the RESTful format.
That makes sense.
Cool.
So it's like, it's making either a fetch or an AJAX request to like router.post for the contacts ID.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Good. So back to these AJAX questions. So how to use it, different libraries available. So are we pretty good on this, on the high level, what's going on, server, client? Any lingering questions about that? Because this is an important one to get.
When you use like fetch or AJAX, do you use it in your like script.js, or like what file ideally should you use?
Yeah, so typical naming convention would be scripts.js or script.js. And that would be required by the HTML that you send, or it would be imported by that HTML file. So what's being served to the client is an HTML file. That HTML file says, oh, we need some CSS, here's where to get it. Oh, we want this JavaScript file, here's where to get it. And so your browser actually makes a separate request for those files too. But yeah, that is where the AJAX queries go.
From a performance perspective, is it better to use, like say, for example, creditably, use the Windows method fetch as opposed to using jQuery's AJAX method?
I don't know. I don't know what the performance implications are of the different libraries. The main thing that I would be thinking about with the different libraries is what's the browser support for these different libraries. So when we're talking about different libraries, AJAX libraries. So there's jQuery. I can never remember how is it a capital J? I can never remember how they like that. jQuery.ajax. So that's one library. The native ones built into the browser are XML, HTTP request, and fetch. And so XML HTTP requests is supported back a long way. Fetch is more recent. Can I use, have you ever checked out this page? Can I use fetch? Yeah, so it even says a modern replacement for XML HTTP request. Yeah, so of course, Internet Explorer not supported, but most other modern browsers and back, for Chrome, Firefox, and Safari, back a ways. Yeah, so there are different kind of properties of each of these libraries. XML HTTP request is older, supported further back. It's got more options than fetch, but it's also clunkier. It's just it's a little bit confusing how to use, I guess. Fetch is newer and oftentimes preferred. It's not supported in the older browsers, or the support is kind of spotty. Clean, like simple interface. jQuery AJAX. So this is a fine AJAX library to use. One of the things is that it brings all of jQuery with it. So that's one of the reasons to not use it, is that you get the extra bulk of the entire jQuery library.
Every time you make a request, every time you make a fetch.
jQuery library. Every time you load the page. Because when you're loading the page, you're loading that jQuery library, whether it's from your own server or from like a content delivery server, and it's just some kind of bulk. And so if you're not using jQuery in your page otherwise, that's when you might use Axios. So the thing about jQuery and Axios is they're designed for broad browser support. That's true of Axios too. Is when you're writing your own JavaScript library, and particularly if you're a web developer who hates the fact that all the browsers do different things and like don't support things back, you can write your own library to use fetch under the hood in some browsers, but XML HTTP request in other browsers. And so I'm relatively sure that that's how both jQuery, AJAX, and Axios do it. They might actually use only XML HTTP request, just because it's got a few more options than fetch. But the idea with these libraries is they're going to do whatever is possible to support making an AJAX query in as old a browser as they can. So that would be one reason I might pick Axios, for example. Axios is another fine AJAX library. I guess I don't even know what I mean by fine. It's just like it's great. Use it. Designed for broad browser support and does not bring all the heft of jQuery, which can be a plus. Yeah, does that make sense, the difference between these? Any questions about the difference between them? In here, I just generally support you to use fetch. I wouldn't want to say definitively, but I think I think there's broad enough browser support that it's kind of generally safe to use it on apps, especially like this. If you're a company like, I don't know, if you're a company like Yahoo or something like that, where you want to make sure that anyone anywhere who's maybe got like a super old computer, really old browser can use your page, then you would be, and it doesn't even have to be super old, but you would want to ask these questions about browser support, like what's the best thing to use. But in here, fetch is, I think, our preferred library. The API for fetch. So where is it? Yeah, so there are a few different ways to configure it, but there we go. You can define the headers separately and then plug them in here. You can then give fetch the options that you want, and so you can give it a path and then the options. There are a handful of different ways to use it. The way that I typically use it is so it would be something like, yeah, so it can be just as simple as the route and then like the method and then it returns a promise. You can, when you're doing a put or a post, you can give it a body that you JSON stringify. Woo. Yeah. So it's, I don't know, it's pretty straightforward. And if you haven't worked with it, or if you worked with it incredulously and now you're a little fuzzy on it, I'd say take a look at the docs and you shouldn't have much problem with it.
Justin,
yeah.
have you ever thought about giving us, like, I know there's the algorithms thing in the morning,
Mm-hmm.
but it'd be cool if you like gave us like a pop-up quiz, like, okay guys, it's 2 o'clock. You have 20 minutes to write a fetch. And like just random shit that we should be like keeping across all the modules that we're doing. I don't know, it's just an idea.
Man, I like that idea. I'm so glad you brought it up. I of course would do that as an optional challenge.
Yeah.
Not like, kick you out of the guild if you. But who else would be interested in something like that? Like kind of a quick challenge midday. I like the idea of like picking a random time, like surprise. Sure, we can definitely do that. Focused on the kind of essential skills that you want to be keeping up. Yeah, happy to do that. I'll make a note. Pop quiz. I don't think I've ever been in a context where I've seen someone request pop quizzes.
Really?
But that's great.
I'm requesting pop quizzes.
Yeah, you're taking charge of your learning quizzes. Cool. And then there's this question, deciding when it's better to run a fetch against API versus submitting a form. James.
Okay, yeah, I can give a quick example. So I'm working on Rome, and there's a point where you can like update somebody's profile on the page, and I'm like, I could like make another route and go to another page and have the user just like update these 2 pieces of information, or I could do a fetch, update the page, right away and not have to re-render everything. And I'm like, for that makes sense. And then I was thinking about editing a post, and I'm like, that's like something that's a little clunkier. The user needs to type in more. Maybe I should like put it on a separate route and not do a fetch call for that, and do the operation in a different route. And so I feel like I'm just running into a lot of those decisions, and I'm like, I don't know if what I'm doing is best practice or not.
Yeah. My instinct on this is that it comes down to what you want for the page that you're developing, or for the app that you're developing. If you want to be reloading pages, or if you want it to be like a fully single page app. I see a lot of login pages using, instead of doing some sort of AJAX query, doing an actual post request. And I must admit, I don't know why that's a good idea, but I have the sense that that's an optimal choice in that context. But I would otherwise be inclined to do AJAX, just because the continuity of your page will likely be improved if that's what you're doing. Does that help? Mm-hmm. Okay. Cool. Well, the folks that wanted SQL injection, I don't see them here. Maybe they're on. Yeah, and I'll say this to Brandon too. When he was asking about SQL injection, Brandon has such a tenacity when it comes to learning new things. What I heard him say was, I want to know how to do SQL injection.
Yeah.
And so that's why I had that reaction. But learning, knowing what SQL injection is it's important. Who would say they have an understanding of what SQL injection is and why we need to care about it? Okay. Kind of, sort of. So I was reading, it's one of the more common attacks that happens on the web. And the basic premise is that it happens a lot that you are taking stuff that the user gives you and then ultimately running a database query with that thing.
Mm-hmm.
And if that's the case, someone who is a malicious user, a malicious agent, could take what is like a name field, and in that field add some code that when it is pasted into your SQL query actually changes what the SQL query is doing. And so there are some, you guys are going to love these examples. So yeah, so I think this is just the kind of normal SQL query. But here, if you, what's that?
I just got what's going on there.
Yeah. Yeah, so SQL.
Looks like they're
Right.
checking against this name. This name has a command in it.
Mm-hmm.
And you can make it like 105 and whatever you want it to be.
Yeah, so this would be the query that you probably want, and they've added this on. And the effect of this, do you see what the effect of this is?
It's true. One equals one is always going to be true, so you'll get back every single person in the database.
Yep. Yeah, so you're having an opportunity to modify the where case and kind of leveraging the SQL syntax for like Booleans like this. You can actually just make it always true. 1 equals 1, always true. So yeah, what are some other examples? Hacker might get access to usernames and passwords simply inserting this, I think.
If they keep using or, then SQL should just discontinue the or.
Yeah, so here you're wanting to insert like some quoted text, but they've started their query with some quotes and then kind of achieved the same sort of thing. So where name is empty, which that's where the injection starts, or this is going to always be true, and then you could potentially get all the rows back. Batched SQL statements. Yeah, so you could throw a semicolon in and then add a new query all yourself. And it's worth mentioning that this will work in some contexts, but if you have, if your query looks slightly different, it might not work in that context. So the idea with these SQL injection queries is that people are trying to find vulnerabilities where they can do this to your query. But kind of zooming further out, they're trying to find vulnerabilities where people aren't using what are industry best practices for protecting against SQL injection queries. And I'll talk about what those are in a moment. Yeah, so you can drop tables, SQL parameters for protection. Yeah, I don't quite get that one. Yeah, so you could probably spend a day looking at all of the different kinds of successful SQL injection queries. But who knows what our kind of primary way that we safeguard against this is?
Sanitize the user input.
Sanitize the user input. Okay. How do we do that?
We know what the input what the characters in the input should be, and the characters that shouldn't be in there, toss it.
That's true. We use a library to help us with that. Let me see if I have it here. So this library uses PG Promise, and so here, PG Promise says that when you are adding, can you see this? When you're adding parameters to a query, you should use its libraries. I forget what they call this. Like, they might just be parameters. But you should use this syntax where you're calling the database function with the query first and then the parameters to plug in, because then it can do the work for us of protecting against a SQL injection here. So the way to not do, like this would be the bad way. Add way would be return db1, and we'll paste in this query. And because we're using the backtick, we can do template strings. And so what we could actually do here is this and just directly insert the ID. What's the problem here? This would still run.
It'll take anything that they put in on the query and run it and try to run it.
Yep.
So that's like the easiest way they can inject whatever they want.
Yep. Yep. It would run whatever they, like literally whatever is sent in through the form parameters or whatever, however the data is coming in, it would literally insert it directly into the query. So, be attentive to this. If you've ever, I see most people doing this, and that's great. But just you definitely want to check and see if you've ever written something like this, because this would be vulnerable to that, to a SQL injection. Yeah.
It's not about that, but would you have to put limit 1 if you're only asking DB to return 1?
No, I don't know why I did that there.
Okay. Just wondering if I've been missing something.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
So I'm going to delete the bad way. Cool. Any other questions about SQL injection? Feel like you have an understanding of it now? Cool. MVC while the boilerplate code. So your question was, I wonder if I have a repo where we're doing this. Do you have something up where you can show? Yeah, why don't you go ahead and share your screen?
Assuming it's right-click Apple TV HDMI 2.
Oh, if you can just join the Zoom room.
Oh, that would also be easier. Let's see here.
When you see a file structure, it always gets that it's like model server views. It's almost like but it's a bit different than a server isn't controllers, right?
Server would be controller, yeah.
And people just do different things. Like some people put their database in one place and their data, it's confusing.
It is the result of free will.
I'll choose in my own way then.
Yeah.
I'm gonna put my database in my views.
So this is just following the Puneet's like simple auth thing we did like back in October.
Uh-huh. Can you blow up the font size?
I just switched to VS Code, so I have no idea. Anyone?
Command plus sign.
There we go.
Okay. So it's particularly on here. So in the models DB, we have all the queries in here. We're exporting them all, and then in a file outside of that, still in models but not in the DB. Literally, we're just importing all of those methods and exporting them again. I mean, I guess we are doing aliasing here by instead of calling it create user, we're calling it create. Why are we doing that? So that's my question. Why do we need to do that?
Who has an idea about this? Why do it this way? Yeah?
Kind of.
Oh, I do.
I think part of it is that so that when you need to go and change something later, you're not going to have to change it across the board in all these different files. So you just have to change it once in one file, and then it gets called in another. So I think there's also something about protecting your code that I don't know. Abstraction.
Yeah, who said that? Yeah, Jay, 10 points. Yeah, so I think the two are getting, kind of getting to the same thing, which is you're wanting to create an abstraction of your database, an abstraction from your database. And so your models directory is your kind of, I talk sometimes about contracts, like your contract with the rest of your code. The idea being like what your, if somebody else wrote the models code, they would say, hey, you don't need to worry about what's in this directory, how we do it, but we want you to know there's this and this and this and this function. So the idea is that you have a models folder that could implement the data fetching in whatever way, whether it's from this database or that database or a JSON file or a text file or, whatever. And this is the interface, that users.js, users.js. So this is the interface. And so it provides this kind of buffer, like you're saying, from the database. So if you were to use a completely different database or something like that, you would change one thing here and not everything in every part of your code. I think another reason that Puneet in particular structures code this way, and I think it's smart, is that it allows you to do some kind of logical grouping of your model functions. So it doesn't look like this code is leveraging that, but instead of having one like db dot, and then you have like find user, get user, replace user, you have find album, get album, whatever it is, you're actually creating, I would call it a domain. So you could have model.user.create. So it doesn't have to be create user, model.user.create, model.albums.get, and that's one thing that you're able to do when you have a structure like this, where you're importing all of the database functions. Then you can structure it in some particular way that's easy to work with. That's my best guess at reading Puneet's mind about that. And in general, it's just this question of abstracting one thing from another. Cool. I love how this works, that somebody can share their screen and it can show up here and on Zoom.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Zoom is so good.
So that covers everything in the office hours. Anything else before we go? Helpful? Good questions. Pop quiz coming soon. Thanks, everybody.